Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating piece, The Glorified Crucifieds, a close reading. We're just going to jump right into this one, because it is a deeply visceral, thought-provoking poem, and we've got a whole lot to unpack.
Okay, let's dive into this. The imagery just hits us right out of the gate. A child jumped happily into a diseased pool, and the conditioned crowd cheered her on through and through, for that's what they do, calling the rotten stench a sweet perfume. I mean, have you ever seen a crowd literally cheer for something that is undeniably toxic? That is exactly the jarring reality the author throws us into right from the start.
So to really grasp that opening, we need to break down this central metaphor of the diseased pool. The author immediately establishes a world where society doesn't just normalize destructive behavior, they actively applaud it. The crowd is conditioned to take this incredibly toxic, hazardous environment and totally rebrand it as something wonderful. They go so far as to call a rotten stench a sweet perfume. It's this wild collective delusion, and unfortunately, the child is the one paying the ultimate price for the crowd's cheers.
The poem continues and it gets even darker. And though she smiled unseen, inside her soul grieved. And why? Everyone was celebrating her suicidal withering as if it was an ascension to the peak of living. Now I want you to really notice that chilling phrase, suicidal withering. The crowd, they see an ascension. They think they're watching someone reach the absolute peak of living, but the reality is literal deterioration, a total withering away of the self.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this tragic, yet honestly highly relatable juxtaposition. You have this clear split between outward appearance and inward reality. Smiled unseen represents her outward compliance, right? She's giving the conditioned crowd exactly what they demand. But entirely in secret, her soul is grieving. The victim is trapped in this awful paradox where she's receiving the highest praise and celebration for basically orchestrating her own demise. It's such a powerful mirror to how everyday people often wear masks just to appease societal expectations.
But right here, the narrative takes a crucial shift. A passing-by child looked upon this tragic scene, and a wisdom dawned upon her in a frantic leap. Suddenly, we aren't just watching the victim anymore. An outside observer enters the picture, and almost immediately, this outsider sees straight through the crowd's toxic illusion. This brilliantly illustrates the power of perspective. Look at the contrast. The first child is submerged in the pool. She's grieving inside, but still performing for the crowd, desperately bound to their approval. The passing child, on the other hand, has physical and emotional distance from that diseased pool. Because she isn't in it, she isn't conditioned by it. And that distance grants her this frantic, urgent wisdom. She can clearly recognize the absolute horror that the first child is actually enduring. And then, that passing child has a profound epiphany. The machine made many murderers and taught the being murdered to call it martyrdom at worst and lucky at best. The rhythmic cadence of these words really underscores the dark realization happening here. We realize it's not just a misguided crowd anymore. No, it's an organized, systemic exploitation.
Let's unpack this concept of the machine. We're not talking about gears and metal. It's a societal system. It's a system that makes murderers out of everyday people in a conditioned crowd, and honestly, worse than that, it gaslights the vulnerable into completely misunderstanding their own destruction. The machine basically brainwashes them into believing that being destroyed for the entertainment of others is either some noble martyrdom or, tragically, just a stroke of good luck. It's an intense, spot-on analogy for the very real pressures of conformity we often run into in our own lives.
Which brings us to the observer's ultimate, horrifying realization and her incredibly defiant reaction. But if I have to burn so the world can be entertained then the world could sooner drown in boredom than to see my soul become their dying whoredom. Take a second to just let the starkness of those words resonate. It is an absolutely powerful, defiant closing statement.
So the crucial point is, how does she actually act on this frantic wisdom? Well, first, she entirely rejects the premise of burning just for the entertainment of the crowd. Second, she decides she would rather the entire world literally drown in boredom than give them what they want. And finally, she absolutely refuses to let her soul be compromised or consumed by that societal machine. It's the ultimate rejection of conformity. She is fiercely protecting her individual autonomy over the hollow applause of the conditioned crowd.
I want to pause here for a second and properly acknowledge the mind behind this incredible imagery. This piece is from Solids Seething, all rights reserved, copyright Sego Stephen Kofi. As we explore this powerful work today, on June 29, 2026, it's so clear that his words transcend the page and ask us some really difficult questions about our own society.
And that brings us to the core dilemma of the poem, a choice we all face when it comes to conformity. So, I'm going to leave you with this. Will you jump into the diseased pool just to hear the crowd's cheers, or will you let the world drown in boredom to save your soul? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.